The gun violence in the United States has really gotten out of proportion, and the many woes and the many troubles and problems that are really permeating the United States of America today are truly a concern. This is why I created this podcast, which I titled, "The Stage is Already Set for Another Bloody Civil War Coming Up Soon in the U.S." Please join me. The New Radio Church of God and the Plain and Simple Truth Ministries present the Messenger of the Lord with Apostle Yeshua, preaching the gospel of the good news of the kingdom of God and informing you about world events in the light of Bible prophecy and preparing the way for the return of Jesus Christ. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Apostle Yeshua. And greetings, friends. As you well know, there has been a lot of gun violence recently in the U.S. It seems that all you have to do is tune into any news channel and there will be a report of some school shooting, mass shootings, and reports of people being gunned down all over the U.S. almost as a daily occurrence now. And we need to ask ourselves, why? Why is this happening? Well, God Almighty has revealed the answer to this question to me this day, and it's just plain and simple. The so-called deep state, that shadow government, and the original men in black, who have their headquarters in Rome, are the culprit for all this violence and inciting all these random shootings and so forth in order to create a problem. Gun violence, which in turn will create a new U.S. crisis, a civil war between Democrats and Republicans. So they can create their prescribed solution to this problem, martial law, following their typical Hegelian dialectic. History will repeat itself. In case you never were aware of this, the secret society has been also responsible for the Civil War of the 1800s between the North and the South. Just notice what President Abraham Lincoln wrote about this. The war, for example, the American Civil War of 1861 and through 1865, would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1865. The 16th President of the United States. And so we have the Masons in control of the Nation of Islam and the Ku Klux Klan, one agitating blacks and the other agitating whites, to the glory of the Jesuit order. The other civil rights movement had the Jesuits behind that with Lafarge. Jesuit Lafarge was a great mover and shaker of the civil rights movements. And that agitation resulted in amalgamation, race mixing, the destruction of a white race and a black race, producing a nation of hybrids that cannot maintain free government. That is what they proposed to do in the first Reconstruction, the Civil War of the 1800s. But it failed, so they succeeded in the second Reconstruction in the 60s. The Jesuits are masters of the races. They know their strengths and their weaknesses. The only race who successfully resisted the Jesuit order is a white Anglo-Celtic Saxon race with a Bible in one hand and a gun in the other. And so they got to take the Bible away, they got to take the gun away, and they got to destroy that race. And that's what they're essentially doing here. I know that's a racist statement, but I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. It is what it is. That's history, and that's what they're doing. That's why they have created the Black Lives Matter movement, and it all has been done under strict orders of the Black Pope of Rome, the current Jesuit general. What they want is to create friction and tensions between Democrats and Republicans over the gun laws issues in order to create a new civil war between these two groups so they can then establish martial law. Just take a look at this article that I'm going to read to you from the Financial Times. Is America heading for civil war? It was written by Edward Luce on May 30th, 2022. A clutch of books makes an alarmingly persuasive case that the warning lights are flashing redder than at any point since 1861. In the summer of 2015, America caught a glimpse of how its future could unfold. The U.S. military conducted a routine exercise in the South that triggered a cascade of conspiracy theories, particularly in Texas. Some believed the maneuver was the precursor to a Chinese invasion. Others thought it would coincide with a massive asteroid strike. The exercise, called Jade Helm 15, stood for Homeland Eradication of Local Militants, according to one of the right's dark fantasy sites. Greg Abbott, Texas Republican governor, took this raving seriously. He ensured that the 1,200 federal troops were closely monitored by the armed Texas National Guard. In that bizarre episode, which took place a year before Donald Trump became the Republican nominee for president, we see the germs of an American breakup. As with any warning of impending civil war, the very mention of another American one sounds impossibly alarmist. Like persistent warnings from Chief Vital Statistics in the Asterix comic series that the sky was about to fall on ghoulish heads. America's dissolution has often been mispredicted, yet a clutch of recent books make an alarmingly persuasive case that the warning lights are flashing redder than at any point since 1861. The French philosopher Voltaire once said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." As the University of California's Barbara Walters shows in her bracing manual, How Civil Wars Start, U.S. democracy today is checking all the wrong boxes. Even before Trump triumphed in the 2016 presidential election, political analysts were warning about the erosion of democracy and drift towards autocracy. The paralyzing divisions caused by Trump's failed putsch of January 6, 2021 has sent it into dangerous new territory. Polls show that most Republicans believe without evidence that the election was stolen by Democrats backed by the so-called deep state, the Chinese government, rigged Venezuelan voting machines, or a feverish combination thereof. In This Will Not Pass, a book by New York Times reporters Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns, Joe Biden is quoted telling a senior Democrat, and I quote, "I certainly hope my presidency works out. If it doesn't, I'm not sure we're going to have a country." That a U.S. president could utter something so apocalyptic without raising too many eyebrows shows how routine such dread has become. In 1990, the CIA correctly forecast that Yugoslavia would break up within 2 years because its politics was hardening into ethnic factions. In 2022, America's two parties are increasingly sorted along racial and identity lines. Republicans are white, small town and rural. The party now holds just one truly urban congressional district in New York's Staten Island. Democrats are now almost entirely urban and multi-ethnic. The habits of a normal democracy in which the losing party forms a loyal position are vanishing. More than a third of Republicans and Democrats today believe violence is justified to achieve their political ends, compared with less than a tenth of a piece in 2017, the year Trump took office. His rhetoric opened the floodgates to separatist feelings. When one party loses, its voters feel as though their America is being occupied by a foreign power. America, Walter points out, has become a factionalized autocracy, the halfway state between autocracy and democracy that is quickly approaching the open insurgency stage. Violence talks America's political language. As Stephen March, a Canadian novelist, writes in The Next Civil War, a richly imagined Jeremiah about America's coming disunion, the country is one spectacular act of violence away from a national crisis. How did America reach this pass? Take your pick of green milestones, New Greenwich, scorched earth approach to his term as polarizing Speaker of the House of Representatives in the 1990s, the Supreme Court's 5.4 ruling that handed the 2000 election to George W. Bush, America's unhinged response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the FBI's faithful probe into Hillary Clinton's almost comically trivial emails, Democrats attributing Trump's win to Vladimir Putin, Trump's attempt to uproot every guardrail within reach or Congress, failure to unite and the need to punish a violent assault on itself. America's democratic backsliding is like novelist Ernest Hemingway's famous observation on going bankrupt. Gradually, then suddenly. Burns and Martin provide a diligently researched and often illuminating chronicle of America's recent political degeneration. Much of it boils down to the absence of character. As the dust settled on last year's Capitol Hill assault, composed of an almost entirely white rabble of retired policemen, nurses, property developers, doctors, lawyers, and small business owners carrying Confederate flags, nooses, Smith & Wesson handguns, stun devices, firecrackers, handcuffs, chemicals, and knives, Republican leaders breathed a sigh of relief. The Capitol may have been littered with glass, its corridors smeared with fecal matter, but the Trumpian spell had been broken. This despicable human being, who happens to be a Mason, had finally discredited himself, said Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate leader. Kevin McCarthy, his counterpart in the House, said Trump's actions were atrocious and totally wrong. 3 weeks later, McConnell voted to acquit Trump for what he had called a failed insurrection. McCarthy backtracked even more, heading to Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Florida retreat, to renew his fealty. In the intervening weeks, he had concluded that his only pathway to becoming Speaker was with the blessings of the disgraced ex-president. Trump was on life support, said Adam Kinzinger, one of just 10 Republicans who voted to impeach him. He, McCarthy, resuscitated him. The authors brand McCarthy as perhaps the most integrating figure in the Republican Party. There is fierce competition for that honor. South Carolina's Lindsey Graham, among others, is hot on McCarthy's heels. It was not absurd to hope that Biden's folksy touch would lower America's fever. It was nevertheless forlorn. America is even more bitterly separated into imagined rival nations than it was under Trump. Biden did not help matters by promising to restore bipartisan normalcy, a pious hope and lie shredded under Barack Obama, while also vowing to be a transformative Franklin Roosevelt-style president. With a 50-50 Senate, this was never realistic. Joe Manchin, the obstinate West Virginia Democrat who has blocked Biden's big reform bills, did not hold the balance of power in FDR's Washington. Democrats thus retreated into their by-now routine ethnic division of spoils. Biden treated his cabinet selection as an identity politics Rubik's Cube. Wright, Burns, and Martin. Far from dangling the hope of a new generation, his vice president, Kamala Harris, has never excessively and extremely fixated on real and perceived snubs in ways the West Wing found tedious. They write, their party faces likely decimation in this year's midterm elections in November, which will set up a crushingly depressing 2024 rematch between Biden and Trump. A popular Trumpian t-shirt says, I'd rather be a Russian than a Democrat. More seriously, the number of right-wing militias in the U.S. has certainly exploded in recent years. White supremacist sentiment has also penetrated U.S. law enforcement agencies, says Walter. The numbers of armed potential insurgents is as multiple of the left insurgent groups, such as the Black Panthers and Symbionese Liberation Army, that caused such panic in the early 1970s. How would a 21st century U.S. Civil War actually happen? Nothing like the first time, Unlike the 1860s, when America was neatly split between the slave-owning and mostly Catholic Confederates and the North, today's separatist geography is marbled. Unlike then, America's armed forces today cannot be outgunned. Even in a country that uniquely has more privately owned guns than people and more than 400 MN, many of which are military grade, it would be no contest. Yet America, of all countries, knows that asymmetric warfare is unwinnable. Think of Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Think also of how America was born. Its Revolutionary Army lost almost every encounter with Britain's vastly better equipped Red Coast. Yet, with the help of the French Freemasons, America's Masonic guerrilla forces prevailed. Now, substitute today's Federal Army for the Red Coast. Armies have a terrible record of pacifying restive populations. Every casualty breeds 10 more rebels. They will slip in and out of the shadows, communicating on message boards and encrypted networks, writes Walter. They will meet in small groups in vacuum repair shops, along retail strips, in desert clearings along Arizona's border, in public parks in Southern California, or in the snowy woods of Michigan, where they will train to fight. The Democrats face likely decimation in this year's midterm elections in November, which will set up a crushingly depressing 2024 rematch between Biden and Trump. Walter's book lays out America's possible road to dystopia with every impressive concision. Her synthesis of the various barometers of a country heading to civil war is hard to refute when applied to the U.S., but she mars her case with a number of basic errors. Nowhere near 60% of the world's countries are full democracies, as she claims. Nor is India a strictly secular democracy. Its truly socialist constitution celebrates rather than shuns all religions. Her book is nevertheless indispensable. None of the writers offers a simple antidote for America's continued democratic slide. The remedies find ways of making multi-ethnic democracy work, get money out of politics, teach questionable civics to American children, have the air of wishful afterthoughts rather than serious game plans. Though Canadian March is poignantly aware of the degree to which global liberty rises and what happens to America in spite of its inaugural Masonic hypocrisies, no other nation was founded on the creed that it could live with and indeed thrive on fundamental differences between strangers. March concludes with these stirring words: it would be a lie, an evil lie, to say that American experiment did not give the world a glorious and transcendent vision of human beings worth affirming in their differences, vital in their contradiction, that is still a vision of human existence worth fighting for. Yet the warning signs have become impossible to ignore. At the end of their book, Burns and Martin quote Malcolm Turnbull, Australia's former Prime Minister, and America's tendency to self-soothe with familiar homilies. They are no longer helpful. You know that great line that you hear all the time, "This is not us, this is not America"? Turnbull asks, "You know what? It is actually." And then there's this caption from an article from USA Today. There have already been a dozen mass shootings this year, without a paralysis. Of the 10 deadliest mass shootings in the U.S. since 1900, 7 have occurred in the past 10 years, and 76 people have been killed in 12 such incidents already in 2022, according to the national data. And then how about this piece from statement Matthew McConaughey? Matthew McConaughey is time to act on gun responsibility. I am a father, the son of a kindergarten teacher, and an American. I was also born in Uvalde, Texas. That's why I'm writing this. I believe that responsible, law-abiding Americans have a Second Amendment right enshrined by our Freemasonic founders to bear arms. I also believe we have a cultural obligation to take steps towards slowing down the senseless killing of our children. The debate about gun control has delivered nothing but status quo. It's time we talk about gun responsibility. There is a difference between control and responsibility. The first is a mandate that can infringe on our right. The second is a duty that will preserve it. There is no constitutional barrier to gun responsibility. Keeping firearms out of the hands of dangerous people is not only the responsible thing to do, it is the best way to protect the Second Amendment. We can do both. Depraved acts of violence with guns as a weapon of choice are ripping apart families, tearing up people's faith, and threatening the fabric of our society. We have an epidemic of indiscriminate mass shootings, of parents burying their children, of inaction and backpassing. Saving the unnecessary loss of lives is not a partisan issue. The need for mental health care, school safety, the prevalence of sensationalized media coverage, and the decaying state of American values are all long-term societal factors that must be addressed, but right now we don't have the luxury of time. We need to focus on corrections and countermeasures that can also and immediately reduce the gun violence tragedies that have become too common in our country. We need to make the lost lives matter. Notice how he suggests another civil group. Our leaders must make bipartisan compromises and a few reasonable measures to restore responsible gun ownership in our country. I believe, number one, all gun purchases should require a background check. 88% of Americans support this, including a lot of responsible gun-owning Texans. I've met them. Ruth, who killed 9 people in a black church in South Carolina in 2015, got his pistol without a completed background check due to a legal technicality. The system failed. Gun control activists call this a loophole. I call it incompetence. Number 2, unless you are in the military, you should be 21 years old to purchase an assault rifle. I'm not talking about 12-gauge shotguns or lever-action hunting rifles. I'm talking about the weapon of choice for mass murderers, AR-15s. The killer in my hometown of Uvalde purchased 2 AR-15s for his 18th birthday, just days before he killed 19 students and 2 teachers. He obeyed the satanic Freemasonic law. Had the law been different, perhaps I wouldn't be writing this today. 3. Red flag laws should be the law of the land. These measures, which are already in effect in 19 states and in Washington, D.C., empower loved ones, the military or law enforcement, to petition courts to temporarily prevent individuals who may be a threat to themselves or others from purchasing or accessing firearms. These laws must respect due process, judicial review, and hold account individuals who may abuse such laws. Number 4, we need to institute a national waiting period for assault rifles. Individuals often purchase weapons in a fit of rage, harming themselves or others. Studies show that mandatory waiting periods reduce homicides by 17%. Gun suicides account for the majority of U.S. gun deaths. A waiting period to purchase an assault rifle is an acceptable sacrifice for responsible gun owners when it can prevent a mass shooting crime of passion or suicide. Integrating gun safety training, safe storage proposals, and holstering school safety are also beneficial, but are not government-only solutions. Companies, private organizations, and responsible gun owners have a big role to play. I want to be clear, I am not under the illusion that these policies will solve all of our problems, but if responsible solutions can stop some of these tragedies from striking another community without destroying the Second Amendment, they're worth it. This is not a choice between guns or no guns. It's the responsible choice. It's the reasonable choice. It's a quintessentially American choice, where I have the right to be me, you have the freedom to be you, and we have the responsibility to be us. To find common ground on this issue, both sides are going to have to answer the call and reach for the higher ground of our collective responsibility. So anyhow, what I believe that will happen with this gun control issue being heatedly debated in Capitol Hill is that eventually will create an unprecedented collusion between both parties and immediately afterwards into civil war. The blood will run, and it will be the perfect excuse for Joe Biden to exert martial law, thereby eliminating the U.S. Constitution for their evil and wicked intent to repress and suppress the masses and incarcerate them at will, to further place them on FEMA concentration camps, according to God's revelation to this, his humble servant. For more information, I highly recommend that you grab a copy of my book, Everything That You Never Knew and You Need to Know About Life. Introducing Apostle Yeshuram's new book, Everything That You Never Knew and You Need to Know About Life. The answers to life's enigmas, mysteries, puzzles, and riddles. Published author Yeshuram brings to the reader in this fabulous work some of the most compelling and thought-provoking subjects and topics that will indeed enlighten you to a superb and amazing sort of compendium of knowledge and understanding, which is also intended to provide the reader with some real and very interesting answers to some of life's most difficult, hard, and intriguing questions. This work explores and will try to bring into light those most basic fundamental explanations to some of the most puzzling and trivial questions that humanity may ever ask about life itself, as well as other enigmas. Everything that you never knew and you need to know about life. You can get your copy at barnesandnoble.com, lulu.com, sweetpublishing.com, and get your copy today. Remember, everything that you never knew and you need to know about life. This book shows you some of the most fundamental things that you never knew and you need to know, like why are you here on this earth? What happens when you die? What's going to happen next? Is World War III going to happen very soon? And many, many other answers to life's most puzzling enigmas, mysteries, and riddles. You need to get this book, Everything That You Never Knew and You Need to Know About Life. You better get your copy today. Also, I further believe that there are actually two issues that are taking place right now in the United States that could trigger a possible civil war, and that is the controversy of abortion as the ruling of the Supreme Court, and also gay rights and the issues that have been going on of not having enough food items, the gas prices, you name it. The U.S. is really in a lot of travail and a lot of problems and troubles that could very well trigger a civil war between Republicans and Democrats anytime soon. So until next time, this is Apostle Yeshuram saying goodbye, friends. You have heard the messenger of the Lord with Apostle Yeshuram, preparing the way for the return of Jesus Christ. For more information on this podcast and this program, you may write us by email at Yeshuram, Apostle of the Lord, at AOL.com. Again, that is Yeshuram, Yeshurum, Apostle of the Lord, at AOL.com. This podcast was sponsored by the New Radio Church of God and the Plain and Simple Truth Ministries, and by the free will offerings, tithes, and donations of those who are listeners of this podcast and are supporters of this great work of God. The preceding program has been a Plain and Simple Truth Ministries presentation.